What's going on, everyone? So, as soon as Matthew Lillard and Stu Macher was announced, which I think they should have waited on, right? I think that that's something that they should have kind of kept closer to the vest, and had that be kind of a surprise in the film. But the moment that they announced that, of course, all of the speculation is like Stu's back, like that's it. Stu Macher has returned; it's official. And I'm still not so sure. Right, a lot of talks about it being AI or deep fake, and that it's not going to actually be him flesh and blood in this film. Now obviously we don't know, it could happen either way. I know people like craving something scary. Shout out to you, buddy. I know he would be jumping for joy, right? He'll be doing backflips in the movie theater if that ends up happening. I'm sure I'll get a couple phone calls, but in general, right? I'm somebody that, I don't want Stu back. I don't. I just think we are so far removed from Stu Macher in 30 years of like, where has he been? How come there's not really any mention or information about him? Right. And he's just been living in a cave for the last 30 years. Like, because it has to make sense. Now, this film could be the beginning of a trilogy. But if it is, then maybe you lay the groundwork in this film, and then that carries into Scream 8, which we have confirmation on, and then maybe Scream 9. So maybe you lay the groundwork in this film that Stu is alive. Here's where he's been. Here's how things happen. Then at the end, you have the reveal that Stu's alive, and then that bleeds into Scream 8 to where maybe now he's actually there as a character throughout. And that way, because my concern is you're going to try to cram pack 30 years into like a 5-minute dialogue or something, and it just, you might not be able to do it, or it might not hit right, and how is Stu? There's a lot of things that we want to know, right? A lot of people have the memory of Stu Macher in their head from Scream, and we've seen characters in other shows and movies and stuff like that come back, and it ruins the character, right? Because it's not the character that they have in their heads, right? So you're going to disappoint people one way or another. Like, there's a huge number of Stu believers, right? And a good majority of those Stu believers are going to hate the way that they bring back Stu, right? And they're going to wish that he didn't come back, because that's just how it always works. So instead, right, what if instead of Stu Macher potentially being alive, they set up him to be believed that he's alive, right? We know he has a sister out there now. We know that, or we don't know who she is, what she looks like. We don't know any of that, right? We just know that, Christine, or that, Leslie Macher, not Christina Carpenter, Leslie Macher is out there. And if you're going to have this be a very Stu-driven movie, which it's looking like it will be, right? It would make sense that his sister is the one that's doing it, right? So essentially, you set up the belief that Stu Macher is alive and he is responsible and the one that is, doing all these killings, doing all these murders. And he's the mastermind and orchestrator of this cult or whatever, right? And, maybe even Leslie Macher shows up and she's, supportive and trying to help and all this stuff. And like, yeah, like I haven't seen my brother in, 30 years, blah, 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 blah. And then in the end, it turns out that she's the actual killer, that she's the one that was actually doing it and using Stu Macher as like the symbol or moniker or whatever, right? Like something like that, I think could make a lot of sense, where you kind of build it up like, oh, Stu is alive. And then in the end, it's like, no, Stu isn't alive. It's actually his sister, which, I mean, look, we've talked about this since Scream 5, right? Like, it's just, is this the film that they finally do it, especially now that we have some information on Stu Macher and how this is going to play out. And, there's a ton of rumors about this, that, and the other, but I'm just speaking like generally, right? Like, I think that would be a great approach, where we as an audience think like, oh, Stu's back. Maybe even the characters think, oh, Stu's back. And then in the end, it's like, no, it's really just his sister. You have a Sydney-driven film, right? So now bringing in Leslie Macher, I don't know why I keep saying Christina Carpenter, Leslie Macher, now that you have a Sydney film, she can make more sense, right? Because, yes, with Sam, you could argue like she's the daughter of, right? But at the end of the day, it's like, Sydney's the one that actually killed Stu. Sydney was the one that took out Stu, right? Like, Sydney Tatum, her best friend was his girlfriend, so on and so forth, right? Like, maybe Stu had this obsession of Sydney and whatnot, because he said, I always had a thing for you, Sid, right? Like, it's easier to paint that picture of, hey, Sydney needs to die because of what she did to my brother type thing, right? And, again, execution, delivery, all of that is very important, but I just think the Leslie Macher approach is probably the better approach, rather than bringing Stu back after 30 years, disappointing half of the Stu believers, and also, having to basically jam pack the entire Stu story into, a 10-minute sequence. Like, I just, it's part of the problem, like, even with like Scream 3, right? The whole Roman thing, right? Like, it wasn't well executed. So by the time you got to the end, Roman, Scott Foley had to spend 10 minutes of dialogue explaining everything, right? The whole point is you're supposed to sprinkle the breadcrumbs so the audience kind of comes to their conclusion and their thoughts. And then in the end, you give that quick kind of confirmation that, like, hey, this is the case, right? So if you had, instead of, pictures of Marine, it was pictures of like Marine and, a little boy or something like that, right? And it's like, or whatever. You're laying the breadcrumbs that Sydney, establish at some point in the movie that Sydney has a brother, right? Like, there was no, like, Sydney didn't even know she had a brother. Like, that's a revelation that you should have had early on. So then when we get to the point where Roman reveals and Roman's like, I'm your brother, right? We already know as an audience, Sydney already knows as a character, and now you don't have to spend 10 minutes explaining the brother thing. You should have explained that story throughout the course, right? Even Gail, uncovering that information and the tape and all that stuff, right? To now Sydney has that information. So when we get into that final showdown, right, we as an audience already know the backstory. Sydney herself already knows the backstory. So now you can kind of just, fill in the blanks, give that confirmation, and then now get to the action, right? So, that's my concern with the Matthew Lillard returning, is that what's going to happen is that it's going to be so convoluted that when we get to the end, it's going to be like, okay, like, and it's not going to be delivered in the way that you need it to. So I think either A, you set up and establish this film as Stu Macher being alive, right? And then you have like maybe the reveal at the end, but Stu Macher's not an actual character, right? Because, like, what are you going to do? You're going to, like, have it be believed that Stu's alive this entire time, and then at the end he just pops up for one final showdown? Like, I think that's silly, right? Because again, now you're going to have like Stu you're going to have the Roman dialogue at the end for 10 minutes, and it's not going to hit the way you need it to. But if you set up and establish that Stu's alive in this film, and then go into Scream 8, and maybe have the reveal at the end, but there's no showdown or anything. Maybe Sydney doesn't even really know that he's alive. And then at the end, we as the audience are privy to it. And then that bleeds into Scream 8. I think that'd be approach. Or you do this approach with, Leslie Macher, where we are led to believe that Stu's alive. And then at the end, it's Leslie Macher. I mean, technically you could do both, right? I mean, you could do something where, Leslie Macher, she's the one, but Stu's really the mastermind. And then at the end, you think you take out Leslie and that's it. That's the end, the Ghostface and the cult or whatever, but really Stu is still alive, right? Maybe Stu's out there, ready to go. And that bleeds into Scream 8, right? So there's ways you go about it, but I think the Leslie Macher route is probably the best approach, personally. Obviously it could just be, a bunch of fanboys or something like that. Like that's something that could work as well. But, at the end of the day, like I mentioned, execution is everything. Execution, delivery, storytelling, all of it is very important. But anyway, as always, this is a discussion. I pass the question to you. Let me know your thoughts and opinions down in the comments. What do you think? How do you feel? What are your thoughts? Do you like the idea of Leslie Macher? Do you think, stay away from Leslie Macher? However you feel, either way, let me know down in the comments. That being said, if you haven't liked this video, hit that like button. Helps me out. It's me enjoy these types of videos, and I truly appreciate it. Not subscribe channel. What are you doing? Hit that subscribe button. Turn on the bell notifications. Appreciate y'all. See you in the next one.